Well, welcome everybody. Nice to see you all here. My name is Richard Adams, and I work with the Centre for Digital Economy at the University of Surrey. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today to talk about, think about, for the next few hours, the idea and the application of blockchain for good. So, welcome everybody. Although this is a discrete standalone event in and of itself, it's also part of a wider project that we at Surrey are involved in with our good friend and colleague at the University of the West of England, Professor Glenn Parry down here. So, if the idea of blockchain for good is something that you're interested in following up on a little bit more, or perhaps you'd like to be more involved in our project, then grab Glenn or I at some point during the afternoon, and we're happy to talk to you some more about it. One thing I've been asked to mention is the hashtag for this meeting, which is B4G 17B, number 4G 17. So if you're tweeting, please use that hashtag. When Microsoft was nothing but a twinkle in Bill Gates's eye, he openly asked the question, what exactly is this new technology good for? What is this new technology good for? And I understand that he went on to find an answer to that problem, to that question, and has subsequently done reasonably well out of finding an answer for it. But scroll on 40 years down the line, and that question is still being asked about technology. What is the technology good for? And now the question is being asked about blockchain distributed ledger technology, which I know it's naughty, but I use synonymously just for the moment. What is this technology good for? And to date, many of the conversations about the technology have been restricted or focused largely on financial services, and the point of today's gathering is to try and extend that conversation a little bit, to move it into a new area, into a new domain that we have called blockchain for good. And by good we mean those sorts of initiatives and applications that address some of the world's global challenges, perhaps articulated by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, addressing issues of environmental degradation, of social hardship, maybe of cultural and humanitarian issues. So it's not about unbridled capitalism, but it's maybe about capitalism with an eye to social and environmental benefits as well. And to do that, I think we need to do several things. One of them is to bring the tech community together with the problem domain. And having had a look at who's in the room today, I think we've managed that. We've got people representing both sides, so that's a great start. We want to get the tech community and the problem domain talking to each other to see where the meshes are, where the overlaps are, where the common interests are, where things can be done. But having done that, I think we also need to begin to dig down a little bit into the distinctive characteristics of blockchain distributed ledger technology, to understand what they are, what is unique about this new technology, and then look at some of the pain points in the for good domain and where these characteristics of blockchain technology might be best or most appropriately applied. So the question is about what are the unique characteristics of blockchain technology? Why and how can they be applied to the question of for good? Are there common characteristics of problem in the domain of for good that make these problems specifically amenable to resolution by a blockchain type solution? And if the answer to these is yes, then I think we need to start asking questions about implementation and adoption and scaling up. What are the barriers? What are the facilitators for this? So that's largely what the session is about today. And to help navigate through those areas, we are really, really privileged to have 7 really interesting use cases coming from the blockchain community who are going to talk to us about their own experiences, their own experimentation in this space. After we've heard from those 7 use cases, we're going to have a little break and then come back and reconvene with a panel discussion with a distinguished panel where we can investigate some of the themes that have been unearthed during the use case examples. We can explore those a little more. And following that, we're going to break for refreshments and have a glass of wine and a little bit of networking after the event. But to whet our appetite, to get our blockchain for good juices flowing, I guess, I'm delighted to invite Robert Kay to come up to the lectern and speak to us about the theme of investing in tech for good, the case for tech for good. Robert is director of Disc Holding and has an illustrious career, a long and illustrious career in global finance, but more recently he's been working with the UK's DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, on implementing blockchain solutions for welfare payments and management in the UK, and with Disc Holdings is building a distributed ledger technology platform to enable transactions in across services, goods, and information. So, Robert, delighted to have you with us. Can I invite you up to the platform? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And good afternoon to all of you. You'll be relieved to know from the schedule that my talk is fairly brief. You may or may not be relieved to know that I don't have any slides. So you may have to stay awake if you want to actually hear what I have to say. I suspect I may have been invited here because Disc Holdings is one of what are still relatively few examples of real live operational blockchain technology in the real world. And we believe in our own way that we are doing good. But as Richard has alluded, and I think we need to be clear about this, my domain expertise is finance, and the problems and operations that we're addressing are being addressed in the UK, at least for now, and our development work is taking place in the UK and Europe. So I'm still with the mainstream, and the problems I'm dealing with are what many people would describe as first world problems. I make no particular apology for either of those things. I believe firmly, and we have held this belief since we started Disc Holdings, which for those of you that don't know was previously called GovCoin. We changed the name for a variety of reasons, which I also won't go into. But if you're dealing with something that is as reputationally stigmatized as Bitcoin and blockchain has been for many years and is well outside of the mainstream, you should really be conducting whatever business you want to conduct in an environment where people can take some comfort that the regulators are mature, sensible and organized, and that the government is interested and engaged and has relatively high standards. And therefore, to start something in the UK is, in our view, entirely obvious, not least assisted by the fact that London remains a key global centre for the development of financial technology, whether blockchain related or otherwise. The second thing that I would say is that the issues that we have faced and continue to face as we develop our business are applicable whether you're dealing with first world problems or third world problems, whether you're dealing with financial problems or other problems. It is not coincidental that a business described as distributed ledger technology is about ledgers, and it's not a surprise that financial institutions whose entire business is simply about ledgers should be the focal point of development in that arena. And indeed, shared ledgers are not new to the financial industry. Cryptography is not new to the financial industry. The techniques of distributed ledger technology are actually not new to the financial industry. But the application of them to interesting problems is something that they haven't really bothered with before. But the issues that we have to address are, what is the role of blockchain in what we're doing? How can and should people engage to deliver better results for their, I'll call them constituents, you can call them clients, customers, however you want to describe them, whoever and wherever they are. What are the challenges of the technology itself, and in particular its application at scale, and how do you get it paid for? All of those things are relevant whether you're doing good or wherever you are doing good. Now, the good that we are seeking to achieve and stimulate is the good that's known as financial inclusion. And I want to briefly define that because everybody has a point of view about financial inclusion. So throughout most of history, people transferred value by initially pieces of gold, pieces of silver, things that had value, more recently by pieces of paper, which by virtue of their government and central bank backing are deemed to have value. When people lose faith in this, they revert back to cigarettes or whatever other common useful currency might be. The beauty of this is it's instantaneous and anonymous. If I give it to Richard, he's got it. He and I have agreed that it's worth something, and the Bank of England is willing to confirm that it's worth something. The beauty of this is actually when everybody was using these, everybody was financially included. Financial exclusion was not a problem when people dealt in cash and coin. But there are obviously a lot of risks with it. Physical security being but the most obvious, fraud and forgery being others, and the lack of any meaningful record of transactions ever having taken place being another. So we moved on about 50 years ago to what we now refer to as payments 2.0. So cash is payment 1.0, this is payment 2.0. So this now creates an electronic record on a ledger. This is the way that most of the value in the developed world is now passed from one party to another. And over 50 years, this looks very similar to the card that any of us could have got 50 years ago. The technology has not materially changed over 50 years. The beauty of this is that it does create a digital record. It doesn't have any value in and of itself, and therefore the ledgers that the parties engaged in the transactions associated with this card, those ledgers become the value. Those ledgers are typically held by banks. And in banks, for a long time, we trusted. We may or may not trust them quite as much as we did 10 years ago, but we still, even if we don't trust them, we recognize that we rely on them to hold records. But when you rely on them to hold records and you allow people to start moving money about, whether they're using a phone or a card or a contactless card, whatever it is, you then have another series of risks. The series of risks are mainly, again, around fraud. Equally, they're around identity. People need to know who I am. If I'm going to instruct NatWest to pay money out of my account, NatWest had better be pretty damn sure that they know who I am. And it would be helpful, as far as governments are concerned at least, if they were pretty sure who I was paying money to. So we've now moved on. For the last 50 years, we've been in payments. So we had thousands of years of just moving money about in terms of pieces of paper and notes and coins. We've had 50 years of pieces of plastic and digital records, which is not coincidentally about as long as banks have actually been using computers to do anything useful. And indeed, many of the banks are still using the computers that they were using 50 years ago and the systems they developed 50 years ago to conduct these transactions. We have built a fantastically complex and brilliantly at one level sophisticated and resilient global network that enables any of us in this room to go almost anywhere in the world and go and pay for a hotel room, a car hire, and even a newspaper. The only problem with that approach, which is very beneficial for us in this room, is that it is fantastically expensive. Fantastically expensive. All of the checks and balances, do I have enough money in my account to make this payment? All of that processing is very expensive, and if you don't conduct those checks, you are open to risk of real loss. And risk of real loss occurs all of the time. If you want to wonder why your contactless card can only be used for transactions up to £30, it's very simple. It's like giving somebody access to your bank account, albeit £30 at a time. But the risk of loss is real. It's continually, work is done to improve things, but it's expensive. It is also the case that the allocation of cost is regressive. So the people who are vulnerable to overspending actually face the highest charges. So if I make a series of payments on this, and I get a statement in a month's time, and it says I owe £1,000, and I say, oh dear, I don't have £1,000, I've only got £100. The people running this card say, well, that's not a problem. We'll extend you £900 worth of credit. And actually, because you're a good guy and we've known you a while, we'll only charge you 1.5% a month for that, which is about 20% a year. If I had an in-store credit card, that would be 30% a year. If not 40%, would be 3% a month. So those people who aren't necessarily as sophisticated as I am financially, who don't necessarily tot up every time they use a credit card how much they could spend, once a month get a statement, and if they can't pay it off, someone's willing to lend them money at what, by most standards, would be regarded as a usurious rate of interest. If, on the other hand, I use a debit card, then, in theory, that gets honoured. Now I go overdrawn, because I'm not controlling my finances. If I go overdrawn, the bank's happy for me to go overdrawn, because it charges me £25 for an unauthorised overdraft fee, and about 5% over base rate as a privilege for borrowing money from them. Not only is it individuals that this is regressive for, if you talk to a newsagent in Hyde, Greater Manchester, as we do, you will find that they are paying between 2 and 5% to a merchant acquirer for the privilege of accepting a card. Now, I happen to travel to Greater Manchester in Hyde because that's where we're conducting the mainstream of our business, but the fact is, most of you won't. And the fact is, most of the people who benefit from the existing card system will not necessarily be doing much business with that newsagent in Hyde, or indeed with Peach Chippy, or any one of dozens of other local retailers who are devastatingly used by the system. So our convenience, our global convenience that enables us to do all sorts of nice and interesting things, is being paid for by a bunch of people who really can't afford it. Now, we have decided that that's probably not sustainable, and in our view, which is a personal view, not desirable. And so we are seeking to change that. And that's basically what we're about, and that's why we're doing good. However, let's not kid ourselves. Not everybody thinks that what we're doing, not everybody would call that good. We are helping the relatively less advantaged. We are working, as Richard said, with the Department for Work and Pensions. They are giving out about 1/6 or 1/7 of the UK's GDP in benefits to 20 million claimants every 2 weeks or every month. For many people, that is by definition not a good. Helping those people is not deemed to be a good. So let's be clear, not everybody agrees that what we're doing is good. And I suspect some people in this room would not necessarily think that what we're doing is good. The second thing is, although there are people, starting with the Chief Government Scientific Officer, Sir Mark Walport, in his report of January 2015, and others in government who think that blockchain is an interesting technology to look into and investigate in the context of payments, there are plenty of people in government, and indeed in this audience, who don't necessarily think it's necessary. So what is the role of blockchain? Well, the only thing that I will say is I'm not going to engage in that discussion now, but I will say two things. One, we have put our money, personally as well as our investors' money, into the notion that the blockchain is a better way of doing this than, let us say, for example, single ledgers and open APIs. And two, the good news is that with the advent of changes in European regulation and legislation coming into force in January 2018, called the Open Banking Initiative, that actually we will get the opportunity to test the reality of that. Because banks will be obliged to create, in effect, open APIs to their standard structured databases. So we will have a real-life test case, a control case, because we have a real-life business. The other thing that I would say that I think is interesting in the context of distributed ledger technology is that IBM has now divided its consulting practice into two thematic groups. The first of those is artificial intelligence, and the second is distributed ledger technology. Now, I'm not betting against IBM. I'm not necessarily betting with them. They may or may not be right, but that's their bet. And the reason that they are betting on it is because actually there are now lots of examples, not just in the financial sector, but elsewhere, where distributed ledger technology is found to be interesting. So we have people like HSBC working in the area of trade finance around the world. We have food and goods provenance being effectively covered off by blockchain technology. We have supply chain management. Indeed, IBM itself is using a distributed ledger in order to manage its supply chain. We have programs related to the distribution of humanitarian aid. We have local energy markets in Brooklyn, Milton Keynes, and one or two other places, where people are actually using blockchain technology in anger to do interesting stuff. It may or may not be the way of the future, but we think it has interesting possibilities. But let's not kid ourselves that it's easy, right? So how do you engage people? Let me tell you, most people are engaging with us have no idea what technology we're using and could absolutely care less. They care about the functionality of the application and how that helps or does not help them live their lives better. And they have given us some very detailed feedback as to what they want that functionality to do, some of which is done more easily using a blockchain, and some of which is actually harder using a blockchain. But we have got very clear feedback that the user doesn't care. So you engage them not with the technology, you engage them with the problem that you're solving. And in their case, the problem that we are solving is they're in a cash environment which costs them as a family £1,300 a year on average. We are helping them reduce that bill. In terms of challenges of scale, all I would say is start small. We have been part of the first cohort of the FCA Sandbox initiative. I was actually at the FCA at their away day yesterday explaining what it was like for us to about 300 of their staff. Generally, we found it very positive, but the main reason we found it positive was it allowed us to play in the real world without doing too much harm to ourselves and managing to do no harm to anybody else. But we have learned a lot of lessons as we have applied blockchain technology in the real world, both small scale, medium scale. We are now in the process of figuring out how to turn it into large scale. You may have seen the reports today. Bitcoin is doing 330,000 transactions. It's worth however many billion it's worth today. So blockchains are operating at scale, but they're not operating at scale consistent with financial markets that are doing hundreds of thousands of transactions in a tenth of a second. So scale is and will remain an issue. The last challenge, I have to say, and this is where we come onto the for good agenda, is in terms of getting it paid for. So the problem that we face is quite simple. Are we a business that's doing good, that might make money? Or are we a business that's making money that might do good? And both of those propositions are investable, but by very different people with very different expectations in very different ways and against a very different narrative. We believe that actually it is possible using technology to lower costs, lower barriers to entry, lower some of those things that I talked about that make this global system so ubiquitous and helpful, partly by making them local, partly by simplifying them, but effectively also by using technology to reduce costs. We think that by doing that, we can make money and do good by getting more people financially included. Time will tell whether we're right. Our investors will either be pleased or unhappy. I will conclude that I've either spent a useful 2 or 3 years of my life or have completely wasted 1,000 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. We're going to move on to use cases now. And according to the programme, Joseph Thompson is up to talk to us about aid tech, but I haven't seen Joseph, and I can't see him in the room at the moment, not even if I stand up here. So Joseph seems to be delayed or isn't here, which is a great shame. Olinga, could I ask you to... So I'm delighted to welcome Professor Olinga Tide from Northampton and, well, many other places as well. Who's probably slightly jet-lagged after.
We were in New York.
We were in New York together not so many days
Friday
ago.
he turned up from nowhere. Yeah. Something we were doing in New York.
But lovely to see you here. Blockchain Alliance for Good. Over to you, Olinga. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, I just got told from my guys that ETC is up 100% today. Could you... Oh, sorry.
Could I ask you just to use the microphone?
Okay, so sorry.
Sorry.
Is that better? Okay. So, very quickly, I have 10 minutes, so it'll be a bit of a flag through this. How does this work? Is this right click? Right click? Thank you very much. There you go. Okay, so this is where we started. We started back in, we're quite a large concern. It's for the Centre for Citizenship, Enterprise and Governance, where it was leading think tank and movement of value. And we, gosh, she's yawning already. Let me finish, and then yawn, okay? I'm going to be the first time I can fall asleep during the presentation, I assure you. Carry, right? Right, so we started really not in blockchain. We started in measuring non-financial value. That was our big thing. And we became the world leaders in that, and a lot of government laws in the UK around the world are based on metrics. So in this country there's something called the Social Value Act. We're the biggest provider of metrics for the Social Value Act 2012, local authorities, LEPs, etc., to measure the value for contracts. So the contracts are placed based on representing 20%, up to 20% social value, and that decides who gets a contract. The biggest we've done is 1.5 billion. So suddenly, I assure you, if you're a CEO, you love children and an environment when there's 1.5 billion at stake. Okay, and they're going to be quite robust because we've been in court 5 times to defend. We've always won, but of course you're going to get challenged. If you don't win a contract because you don't love trees, then you're going to kick some ass, right? So we're there. The new one was Theresa May asked us to do the Modern Slavery Act 2015 before she became Prime Minister. So we've done the metrics for that. And we're the biggest provider there as well. That's a small market, even though it's 17,000 companies. The Social Value Act was about 20 times as big as our nearest competitor. Okay. So let's move on. Right, blockchain. So after 5 years, we kind of got in a kind of leadership position in measuring value. We do the metrics for India, the 2% CSR law, 2% of gross profits must be spent on corporate social responsibility. Indonesia, the same. Mauritius, 2% law as well. And Mauritius is our first whole country gig. We've been asked to measure 141,000 companies, 300 NGOs to eradicate 1% poverty. So measurement, as Bill Gates said, if you don't measure it, like in business, if you don't measure it, you can't bill it. All right, so you've got to measure it first to know if you're good, bad, ugly, whatever. We were very cool with that, and we kind of do lots of things, personal value and so on. But last year we thought, let's move into the transactional value. And we had a dream to do this, and to be honest with you, we thought it was a 100-year gig. We didn't think it was a tomorrow thing. This time last year, I had only just heard of the word blockchain. Okay, I never heard of the word blockchain until then. I went, what the hell is this? You mean there's a concept of moving a block of value from A to B? Sorry. So we started moving into this area to actually say, let's move not just a block of normal value, but other kinds of values. I mean, I think we say here, there are many kinds of values, aren't there? Love has value. Kindness has value. Being generous to people has value. All right? But why can't we transact that? Because for 5-6 years now, we've been measuring value. You know, we digitize non-financial value. We do it. We make non-financial value like sentiment into financial value. I love you, £4.50. It goes down very well, as you can imagine. And the third thing, we use it through fast data. We measure company value in around 10 seconds. People like Barclays, every 10 seconds their share price and their social value. So that was good, but question is, what can we do? You can see I have no idea how this works. So we started moving into the area of taking our tech, now with humanitarian tech, which is why I was in the States, because we went in the hum tech area. Guys, we have 14 inquiries from World Bank, we had 15 from United Nations, IADB, International Development Bank, and we thought, actually, I'm sick to death of traveling back and forth to the States. I don't travel very well, so we have an established relationship with Fordham University, which is where I met him. Fordham University in the States is the biggest humanitarian university in the world. They supply more NGOs than graduates from NGOs. And the great humanitarian Donald Trump was a Fordham University graduate, as are several CIA directors. So there you go. So we can combine technologies. I get it. So we've gone from blockchain, which is a movement of value, hard, tangible assets, to our theoretical framework is that value has both kinds. For the sake of it, we have red plus blue. All right, that is the and we have some quite recognition. So Chandler Go is one of the biggest Bitminer guys in the world, Bitminers in the world. He owns a third of Ethereum. All right. Mm-hmm. His server farms are bigger than some of these buildings. We brought him over into University of Cambridge conference last November. He's become a good friend. I was with him 4 hours on Sunday. We're doing a $5 million ICO, hopefully September this year, in the area of non-financial coin. All right. And we need his expertise. You know, cryptocurrency isn't my expertise. We have recruited the head of Barclays. She was head of Barclays, government Barclays card, I think. 30-year banker, Bank of England's Payment Council, head of cryptography, director. And she was used to transacting 385 billion a day in real money, and we moved her as CEO into this area. She's head of Russian Lines for Good. Because this is serious stuff. When you're moving big money, it's serious stuff. It's out of academia. And so Barbara Mellish, who sadly couldn't be here today, she's actually on board of a bank right now, doing her normal stuff. So Chandler is a fan of our work, and we're very honored to have this guy. Okay, so this is where we started. Don't read the blurb. That was our dream before we heard of blockchain. Currency of intangible value. We know the currency of financial value is $1. What's the currency of non-financial value? That was the key. Where we are right now, we have about 35 commissions. I'm not going to talk about them. I'll talk about 6 because we're all quite busy. The biggest ones. And generally speaking, we rarely ever do anything without being commissioned, because 125 academics, 50 analysts. We've recruited 17 more blockchains since January. We had 5 before. These cost money, and we're not just a charity. Okay, we're not for profit, but we have to get it funded. So people fund us to do these things. We're building a platform now to release in September, next to the ICO. It's like an Ethereum out of UK, but for non-financial value. Okay? And the point being, it brings in non-financial value and non-financial impacts. So here are some of the applications. The first one that caught people's imagination, not our first project, was actually Islamic coin. That's a really controversial thing to say, isn't it? After Monday. It's a really controversial thing to say. If I said to you normal Islamic coin, you would think quite possibly terrorist money. If I say to you a coin which carries the beliefs, the correct beliefs of religion, the peaceful beliefs, that if you follow those beliefs, you get rewarded, discounted, etc. That's a complete different ballgame. That has led us to another relationship which we can't announce yet, but in September, October we'll announce, with a massive faith-based funding. The faith is a huge pension fund and organizes. My first speech at the Vatican was because of money movement through faith. SDGs. So the point about the United Nations is that they told us, we sponsored a conference in January in Beijing and in Washington, and they told us, look, 60% of our money we receive, including the World Bank, is spent by ourselves. 30% is spent by the country we're in, and 5% maybe gets to the person we're trying to help. So what we want is to see the impact associated with the money transaction. If the impact is not delivered, the money does not get transacted. And the impact is more than just money, isn't it? If I empower you, if I make you a happier person, if I can then go out and get a job, you've got to be able to capture those values. Look, Women's Coin is a new one from Lady Bamford, the family owns JCB, I think you may know. And that is a coin for women by women, carrying the values of women. I've been told about 2 minutes, so maybe they've knocked me out already. There you go. This one is a simple paradigm. I'll do it all three in one go. I go volunteering, I get credited, boop, social credit. I go to my Starbucks, how much? $10, I give you $8 cash, $2 credit. We're doing this for John Lewis right now with a big million trial. I then go down Google Street. I shop here, not here, because they're a good company and they're not such a good company in my eyes, my value system. I go and buy this coffee, not this coffee, because this is made by slavery conditions, and this isn't. So use value as a kind of transaction system. So finishing off, really, we've got a big project with Metropolis, 1,200 cities. We're doing 5 cities, Bristol. I believe some of you guys are from Bristol. To begin with, impact interventions, Citycoin, Bristol, Guangzhou, Medellin, Berlin, Mashhad. Some guys from South Africa there, gentlemen I just met. We have 10 people on provenance of leather. Fashion industry. The fashion industry is a live animal to begin with. It's a dead animal, and yet it's suddenly worth a lot more, for instance, hanging on someone's arm. And then finally it goes to a landfill. The financial value goes like this. The non-financial value drops like a stone when it was live, to dead, to abattoir, tannery, conditions, etc. Tracking the provenance of those products. This project over there on the right is actually, we just had this morning, a £40 million project in the UK. We haven't started. A £20 million application by HEFKE universities, matched by £20 million financial funding from the private sector. Ironically, we founded the financial sector, the private sector money, and we now have got a consortium of 12 universities to put us into a blockchain for knowledge procurement. As you acquire knowledge, it's not just badges, it's also non-intangible knowledge, knowledge from faith, knowledge from volunteering, etc., all to accumulate as a passport. I think we're going to skip all this boring stuff. What we do, lots of white papers. We are on our 5th white paper now. You can go, it's all open source. We're an open source organization. Lots of conferences, lots of proof of stuff, now at enterprise level. Only to say it's built on a theoretical framework, which is called social earnings ratio, which became, in 2013, the fastest adopted impact metric in the world. And that's it. We have 60,000 members, 7,000 heads of CSR, the biggest companies in the world. We lead in that position. We have a journal free of charge to everyone, whether you remember or not, about 80, 100 pages. Those last are on blockchain. These are people who actually asked us for interviews, can you imagine? Of course, that's Donald Trump on the 4th one, yeah. And we get commissions for measuring all kinds of non-financial stuff. All kinds. Faith, religion, all kinds. We get that. It's embarrassing, but that's what the Vatican called us. We have 5 commissions for the EU. Last week I was in Paris because we started up a fashion industry provenance of products. People like Natalia Supernova, who is the biggest supermodel in the world, maybe top 3. She has something called LB, a love coin. Okay, who want to reward people through fashion, again through purchasing, through the power of purchasing. Those are the companies who work with us. I think there are 4 people on MasterCard there's a guy called Sam Mazloom who's working with us with MasterCard. You guys have got 3 patents and 40 blockchain, 3 white papers and 40 blockchain apps, patents out there. Because we want to bring in the assured coin basis. I think MasterCard and Visa guys understand that. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Olinga just before he steps off the stage?
No, great. Fall asleep now.
Thanks, Olinga.
I was just going to ask, before we go, what's the answer to Richard's question previously of the people who are wanting to run companies which happen to do good are the ones who want to do good and have to make a profit? What would you say?
Yeah, look, goodness is something, I'm going to revert to another area rather than blockchain, which we measure companies, construction companies, for example, bidding for contracts. Hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of pounds of value. Sometimes the companies are terrible articulating the non-financial value. They actually do a lot of good, but they just have no clue how to articulate it. Hence the concept of currency. In the end, you've got to be able to articulate it very simply, and not just little pictures of multicolored children and trees in the CSR report. You've got to say, when we purchase something, we go, this has the calories, that many carbohydrates. At the point of purchase, we've got to articulate non-financial value and metrics. That's why, although metrics is a terribly dull area, and it's been my life for a few years, the fact is, the impact is that companies who do good, their good is captured, and you must never judge, never. We have the most when you're judging on contracts, we have companies who claim the most outrageous things. We had one company on the tiniest contract we ever done, 6 million, which is like nothing in public sector, I should tell you, say that they deliver £18 million of social value. And we went, come on. Why don't you just give us 80 million? Just forget building the goddamn fire station. So it's about, don't be judgmental. When he says, he should not be apologetic. It's about recurring revenue. You've got to make money. You've got to deliver this. This stuff costs money. We all here have a part to play in this. All of us.
Sorry, can we save it until the break?
You're going to be in the panel later?
No.
But he'll be here in the break.
Oh my God. It's out of my head.
Karl, if I could invite Karl Woods from Save the Children, please.
I don't have any slides, and I kind of wish I did, because I started watching the new series of Twin Peaks, so my head was all over the place. That might have guided me through this. That and being hit on the head with a pigeon. It flew into my head on the way here, which was quite bizarre. So that side, if there's nothing else you remember from my presentation, those 2 things would be quite good. So I'm CIO at Save the Children UK, so I'm going to just have a little bit of an explanation about Save the Children and what we do, because I think the structure and the way we work is quite important from the kind of concepts of blockchain and how we might look to apply that. So we are a global movement of 30 to 40 member countries, which means we are all independent, so we have our own chief execs, own CFOs, etc., all working together collaboratively in the delivery of a global strategy that we've got. So we all work on that together. So no structure in that sense. We are a federated, distributed organisation. So the good bit for us is, we do lots of good in the day-to-day work that we do. But my role in technology is to look at how can we make ourselves more efficient and more effective, because ultimately what we need to do is maximise our impact for children at the end of the day. So we've been looking at blockchain for a while, just thinking of use cases. Now, if you believed everything you read, blockchain can solve absolutely every problem there is in the world, which clearly isn't the case. But I think it's important for us to explore the opportunities that can help us with, and some of the solutions and problems it can help us to solve. So we've looked at a range of things, from philanthropy, so how might that work in a smart contracting situation, for example, with our corporate partnerships, is there something we can do there? Through the supply chain, we move lots of equipment and goods and services all around the world on a daily basis, and when you're working in fragile states, fraud, provenance, access to history of transactions, records, all that kind of stuff. Potential use cases as well. But the three that we're really looking to progress at the moment, and one is a little bit more advanced than others. So something around fundraising and transparency. So how do we be more transparent, or how do we give some more transparency to the donations that we get on aggregate? So where's that money going? What are we doing with that? How do we know that it's made an impact? So at the moment we have lots of monitoring and evaluation systems linked into finance systems at a fairly granular level. How do we then present that back out, and how do you know as an individual donating your £5, £10, whatever it may be, or raising money for running the marathon, what's happening to that? So that's one we're exploring. I think there's an interesting kind of dilemma there around how open and how transparent people need to be on that. And also, does that move funding into the more restricted route rather than the unrestricted, which is, for those that are unrestricted, is the money that we can spend on what we like, whereas if you're giving £5 and say spend that on the Syria campaign, that's restricted and I have to spend it on that and show that value. So if it pushes more into restricted, then there's a question of overheads and how do you manage it and how do you run as an organisation. So that's one other use case. The other one for us is cash transfers. So globally we're a $2.5 billion organisation, UK £400 million turnover. So on the annual basis, we're transferring several hundreds of millions of pounds every year, which attract transaction fees, costs, etc. So is there a method in which we can use blockchain to make that more efficient? So again, the money is going further to the front line than it currently does in that case. That's an interesting one again, because at scale we need to look at how we adopt and how we might apply that. So how do we do that on a smaller scale than just trying to bite off and boil the ocean and try and do that en masse across the whole movement? So we're looking at ways in which we might be able to apply that on particular use cases. So the third one, the one which is most advanced for us at the moment, is around child safeguarding. So we work with our child safeguarding director. We have an issue in emergency lands that we need to deploy staff, and we need to deploy people that we have in our network to help us out in those situations. So at the moment, our child safeguarding director describes it as this kind of unbearable conflict. You have a group of people that you need to deploy to be able to make some impact in that emergency situation. If they're not known to us and they're not checked, we've got two choices. We either deploy them and potentially put children at risk, or we wait for those checks to come back. So what we're looking at doing is, can we develop an identity-based solution where people can register, pre-register, and we can verify that they are a doctor, we can verify that they've had their DBS check, so that when that comes to the point of deployment, we know who they are and we know that they're safe to be deployed in that situation. And the reason we think blockchain suits for that is because we operate in this kind of semi-untrusted environment, because we are separate legal entities with separate processes going on, and we don't know whether those checks have actually been verified in other countries when we're looking at a register of people to deploy. So at the moment that kind of relies on basically an emergency deployment spreadsheet, which you can imagine that's open to all sorts of potential misuse there. So how can we make that more efficient and more effective so we're deploying the right people at the right time on the ground? So that was my whistle stop. Great tour of what we're doing. Keep you back on track and timelines.
Thank you, Karl.
Any? Do you want questions, or wait to the end of it?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions for Karl.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I'm curious, are say the children not terrified that blockchain and donor to beneficiary relationships are going to really threaten international development charities with an all-time low in confidence and trust by the public in charities?
So I think this notion of disintermediation comes up quite a lot, and it's a topic of many a conversation. Are we going to be Ubered or whatever, insert kind of organisation name here, phrase. But I think for us it's what we do at scale, and that's quite hard to replicate. So if we're running mass programs at scale, that's slightly different to maybe a child sponsorship type program. So I think that it's going to happen inevitably to some degree, but I think running a 5-10 year program to eradicate child deaths under fives, whether that's pneumonia or that's diarrhea, etc., that's a slightly different kind of construct to direct programming, direct sponsorship, I think. So I think there inevitably will be some movement in that area, but I think for us it is what we do at scale which is the difference.
Pigeon, can you tell us a bit more about that pigeon?
Yeah, it had a ring round its thing. I don't know if it's blockchain enabled or not. But,
Sorry, Karl, even though you're in the third sector, you presumably still have a board that you have to justify these things to in some way.
Yeah.
I know you said you're not hierarchical now. How do you sell the idea of a blockchain solution versus anything else?
So I think it goes back to the point that was made earlier. Board don't really care what the technology is behind it. Well, should they care? Should they? I don't know. That's probably another debate. But for us, it's part of my role is to try and help and educate the board in terms of new technologies, different ways of doing things. So whether that's through pure disruption or just saying we want to do something in a different way. So there's regular briefings that we give back to the board of directors around what's happening in the kind of marketplace around AI, blockchain, IoT, and I think there's a convergence of all those things that are really going to help us. So that's on a local level. And then I think what we've discovered more recently is there are pockets of people trying to do the same thing in, say, New Zealand and in the US, trying to do some trials in Uganda, etc. So it's about building that community, and I think there's power in that voice of people coming up with business solutions to business problems, rather than saying, hey, look, we've got this blockchain stuff, what can it do for you? Because then you're into the conversation of what is blockchain and why is that different to anything else. Whereas if it is, there's a problem, we can solve it, and we're actually thinking in this way, that's what we're trying to turn the kind of conversation around to.
Very quickly, beyond the application for child safeguarding, have you looked at a role for blockchain in deployment of internal resource and people resource on internal projects and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, we're not going near that one at the moment because we've just embarked on a global rollout of an HR system. So, so I don't imagine I'd be very popular. Yeah, can't answer that one. Cheers.
Okay, now I'm looking for Raphael. Hi, Raphael. From Alice.si.
Exactly. I've got plug this in, hopefully it'll work. Hey. There you go. So I'm the CEO of Alice, and we're what we call a blockchain philanthropy company. But just before I explain exactly what we do, may I ask who here works in the charity sector? If you could just raise your hand. Okay, so a fair few people. That's good. So the big problem that we set out to tackle, and I hope it's going to resonate with you guys in particular, is that there is a trend at the moment that there's a fall in public trust in the charity sector in general. It's a trend that's been going on for a few years. It's a trend that is accelerated from time to time with when the media start to focus their attention on certain charities that are not acting in an ethical way, for example, and it's certainly something that is becoming worrying. Partly because the Charity Commission last year recorded the lowest ever level of public trust in the charity sector in the UK. Partly because if you work in the charity sector, you know that your committed giving, that is the monthly giving where people just give without really thinking twice about it, that is starting to fall. The problem is that people like this are starting to become whipping boys and are really starting. These are the street marketers that everybody knows. They're famously called chuggers, who are sort of epitomising this fall in public trust, which is a shame because actually they're quite nice. Actually, this guy got me to donate just because I was taking his picture. Assistant guy, but they're working for the greater good as well. But more seriously, this fall in public trust is something that the charity sector as a whole, certain bodies at least, are starting to see as a real existential threat for the business model of the sector because of this fall in donations. So that's why we decided to create Alice. So where my background is in government and digital communications, and then I switched careers into charity tech. And one of the big problems that we saw was the fact that people didn't know what was being done with their donations. And really our mission statement is that we want to help, starting with the UK, these 160,000 or so charities that are doing an amazing job to raise more funds for all of the causes that they're serving, and in order to allow them to do that is to just make it easier for them to feed back to their donors what it is that the impact that they're making, essentially, because there's a real misperception or a disconnect between what charities are doing and the impact that they're making, and the perception of the public of that impact. So we're working on several products in order to facilitate that, some of which I can't talk about yet, but the first one, which is now live and has been for the past few weeks, is a hyper-transparent donation platform, which is what we call it. It has its first appeal on there. It's run by St Mungo's, the homelessness charity, and they are raising funds to help 15 rough sleepers in London do things like find accommodation and improve their mental and physical health. And when people donate on the platform, it actually comes with a twist in the sense that your money does not go directly to the charity. The charity first has to demonstrate that it is making an impact before they can receive the money. And that means that by tying or making donations conditional, you are effectively just making it easier for donors to keep track of the impact that their money is making. The way that it works is that, as I said, the funds are collected first, the charity then delivers the outcomes. Every outcome has to be validated. In this case, the Greater London Authority, the housing team, is looking at the proof of how the St Mungo's is helping these rough sleepers, whether that's a tenancy agreement or whether that's a note from the drug abuse rehabilitation program that some of these rough sleepers have entered. And as I said, there's an instant accountability every time an outcome has been achieved. Then the donors know that their money is paid out. They get notified, and they know exactly what their money is paid for. We use Ethereum. We build on the blockchain called Ethereum. It's a public blockchain. Who here has heard of Ethereum? Good. Oh my goodness. Like how things change in a year. It's amazing. Who here knows what smart contracts are? Okay, slightly less. Basically, we use smart contracts. Smart contracts are little programs that you can put on top of the blockchain. We use them to do two things. One is to collect and hold funds, and then the second thing is define the conditions that allow the funds to be paid out. In this case, it's a validator communicating with the smart contracts and saying, this outcome has been achieved, please pay the charity. The reason that we use a public blockchain is because of the transparency that this brings. It allows anybody to audit the program, and obviously that is another level of transparency, another level of guarantee that the charity is acting in accordance with what it said it was going to do. There are challenges. I mean, I can only echo what was said by previous speakers about the ability of blockchain technology to operate at scale. We took the decision really early on that we weren't going to allow people to donate in cryptocurrencies. So actually on the website, and I encourage you, I'm going to give you the link in a second, but to donate and help these 15 rough sleepers. But you donate in fiat currency, so you donate with your debit or credit card. That means that we somehow have to tokenize the donations, because we don't want, for the charities it's really important that there is a real stability or a real visibility in the funds that they're going to get. So if we were to allow to just convert donations into Ether, say for example. Right now it would be amazing because it's shot up in the last couple of months. But if the price suddenly crashes, that means that the charity can no longer pay the staff that is working on this program. So we ran part of our pilot within the Financial Conduct Authority's regulatory sandbox, and essentially what we're doing is we are just pretty much issuing e-money on the blockchain. So that the value of it remains stable. That means that we can play around with it in our smart contracts and offer all the transparency that we were explaining before. It does mean, though, that we are acting as a concierge for the time being. Again, I can only echo the previous comments. Donors don't really care that they are using blockchain technology. Therefore, each time that they donate, we create an Ethereum account for them. There's a little geek mode on the website that allows you to take control of your account and play around with it. But essentially, for them, it's transparent. And because of the limitations in terms of the scalability of the blockchain, we are still actually doing double accounting. So everything is registered on our servers as well as being registered on the blockchain. Simply put, when we did the tests, if you get thousands and thousands of donations on any given day, those can't sync automatically on Ethereum. So we've built a system that allows that synchronization to happen with a delay, so it's asynchronous, basically. But the plan is, little by little, as the technology matures, that we can have full integration into Ethereum. So as I said, this is our first product. It is live. You can donate right now. Just go to Alice.si. SI stands for social impact. If you're a bit of a blockchain geek, you know that Alice is always giving money to Bob, and we're all about giving. So there you go. And if you have any questions either now or later, after the event, then please get in touch, Raphael at Alice.si, or to make it really easy, Alice at Alice.si. There we go.
Lovely. Quick question for Raphael. Dave, right at the back.
If all the transactions are stored in your database, what's the point of the blockchain? Sorry, I missed that bit at the beginning.
Yeah, so
Is it just for marketing, or is there some purpose?
Of course, pure marketing. Pure hype. What I was explaining is that at the moment we have to do double accounting. We have to register those donations both on our servers and on the blockchain because of the problems of scalability. And what I was explaining is that further down the line we want a full integration with Ethereum, but the way that we're doing it is that because everything is registered on the blockchain, when it gets registered asynchronously, it still offers that amount of that pure transparency and the auditability of what is going on in the charity program. So there are limitations to our use of the blockchain. We do have a hybrid system that facilitates that, but we see it as our decision was to try to roll this out to the mainstream and not just to crypto geeks. And then little by little fully integrate into Ethereum as the technology matures.
One more?
So earlier you said that you don't pay charity with Ether.
Yeah.
So does that mean that you're using the Ethereum blockchain just for the execution of the smart contract rather than the monetary side of the blockchain?
Well, so when you donate, we essentially issue a token that represents that donation. So it's pegged to, it's a stable coin, really. It's pegged to the value of the donation. That token is what is used in the smart contracts. Then the charity will receive that token when the outcomes are validated. They actually receive those tokens, and they can exchange those for the equivalent value in fiat, in pound sterling.
Thanks, Raphael. Can we save any other questions for the break, because we're still running a little bit behind, trying to catch up.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Raphael. So we're going to hear from Maria now from Gradbase.
Yes. I have some slides. Thank you. Okay. So we heard today that cryptocurrency can be used for good, and we heard also some of the benefits: instantaneous transaction money, lower the cost of the transaction, and also probably one of the most important ones is that it would enable people without a bank account to actually send and receive money. But what I would like to talk to you today is about how notary application can actually be used for good. I am the technical and business partner at Gradbase. We are a company that enables instant verification of professional and academic qualifications. We are a company that tries to make money. We are a startup for free. Our intent is to make money, but also to make some good along the way. And my presentation today is about to tell you how we are going to achieve that. So I hope I haven't broken this. Okay. First of all, I would like to tell you a brief story. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Berlin at the tech fair, and a big director from a really big company in Germany, an household name, I'm sure that each of you will have at least one product of this company, came to us about the fact that they hired somebody from South America. Now, German HR applications are pretty heavy, and people provided a copy of their qualifications. So after a series of Skype interviews, the person was brought to Germany, and this person was hired and worked for 6 months up until they discovered that the whole qualification were fake. This person was obviously let go and had to go back to South America. That's good business for us because we are in the business of, I'm going to tell you how good we are at verifying academic qualification on the blockchain, but I felt that there was a loss there. Not for the big company. You know, if they make a bad decision about their HR process, well, they have to learn from that. We can certainly are here to help along the way. Not for the person who lied, and each of us has to take responsibility for his own action. But I thought about all the people that do not belong in the advanced economy, that would like to come to the Western world to improve their conditions, or even to bring some of their expertise back home, that now will be denied the opportunities. Because one big director in a big company can have a huge influence. It's very unlikely that that company will trust in the future a university unknown to the Western world, and it's very likely that that director will talk to other directors in other companies. So how can we help? So let me tell you a little bit about CVs and how currently it works. So today, when we apply for a job, we send out a CV. This is a simplified version of it. And if you are an employer or a management or an employee consulting company, you would determine, based on the CV, whether you would like to hire the candidate. You probably invite for an interview. If you see somebody trustworthy, you may or may not decide to make some background checks. Those background checks, however, will take you about 4 weeks, probably. Okay, and still they are not fully reliable. And if you're hiring in a hurry, you may decide, in fact, to skip some of those background checks. Okay. So, what actually we can do, what Gradbase can do, actually, is something a little bit better. You have seen now that we have some QR code on the CVs, and those are effectively ways in which you could verify the academic qualification of your candidate with the tap of the phone instantaneously. Okay, and so what we do, we create a playing field for all candidates, because it doesn't matter where you come from, if you can trust the qualification. And the qualification, I would like to specify, different from any other organization, is put not by the candidate, but the source of data. And that makes the difference. And we do vet each source of data. So you can trust our system. So once you can trust the system, it doesn't matter where the candidate comes from. It suffices that you trust the university, and then you can hire the person. So it doesn't matter how the candidate looks like, where it comes from, what is his ethnicity. The only thing that matters is that the university produces, you trust the university. So just to clarify how we operate, we have a fully developed product that is compliant with the Data Protection Act and also to the future Data Protection Act as well. And what happens is that, so here, issuer upload the records. They don't quite upload the records. They upload a cryptographic digest. Okay, and I agree with what has been said earlier that a lot of what blockchain does uses technology that has been developed in the last 30 years, and probably mostly financial institutions have been used. So financial digests have been around in computing since the 80s. So we upload on the blockchain a cryptographic digest of the data, but effectively the university does that, or the issuer. The candidate will receive a CV, is a QR code, and the candidate has the right to put a QR code on their CV if they want to. And then the employee can, again, I would like to emphasize that just by tapping the phone, can verify that effectively the academic qualification is true. So it's a relatively simple method and it works. What I would like to ask you, how many academic institutions are here in this room today? Good, good. I hope you can come and talk to us. I'm studying a pilot now. You know, it's very simple and it's very good. So, so as I said, we do instantaneous verification. What I would like to say today, however, is specify why we use the blockchain. Because the title of this symposium or event or meeting is Blockchain for Good, not Technology for Good. Very often when I hear people talking about technology, the blockchain, they say, oh, it doesn't matter the technology, only what matters is the use case. But I disagree. Because if it's only what matters the use case, you go to somebody, to a consultant, and he will tell you what is the best technology. And I would like to say why we do use blockchain. First of all, we use it because of the fully distributed nature of the ledger, which is very useful to us in terms of reliability. We use it because it doesn't allow us to say that we own the data. We just put the cryptographic digest there, and people can use our system to verify it. And so there is a sort of lack of ownership. We don't have to justify why do we have this database, who owns it, it is ours, it is yours, it is effectively the user how we want to use it. And so that obviously we do offer service to people if they want to keep some of the data into our database in a more traditional ways. Okay. So I am not a marketing person. I'm not going to tell you ever that blockchain is the solution for everything. This is not a solution for professional immigration from the developing world. I have worked in academia for a large part of my life before moving into the industrial work, within industry. I know, working in a very elite university, how difficult it is to evaluate universities and how difficult it is for employers to hire people. We are not here to solve the problems, but what we are here to solve is enabling people that are worthy, that come from worthy university, that are not known today to the Western world, to be able to move into the Western world. And for companies to be clear that those qualifications are valid. So I would like to make our statement very, very, very clear about that. Okay, so in a sense, we hope that if this technology will become mainstream, because we are at the beginning, we are a startup, this will help university to be well known and candidates to move because employer can trust their CVs. Okay. At the moment, we are in a pilot mode, and we are using the Bitcoin blockchain simply because it's easy. Our technology is completely ledger agnostic, and we are planning to move forward to other blockchains. The good doesn't stop for the candidate and for the employers, but extends to a large number of stakeholders. The first thing I would like to say is that we return a part of the fees that we get from employer back to the universities. And I would like to reflect a moment about this, okay? Because if you are a Western university, it can be something nice to have. If you are a Western in not an advanced economy, and depending on your exchange rate, if your candidate coming to the Western world, that can be quite a nice amount of money you make every year. Okay, so we are willing to give, and we do give back to university. We have flexible subscription fees to enable everybody to use our technology, but more importantly, we do make it free for charities. How many charities are here today? Please come and talk to us. We are willing to work with you and to offer this technology for free. Okay, a little bit of marketing now, but something that is also very true. So we believe that our technology can do a little bit more, okay? So this is an example of a Nigerian software engineer who's worked for the US, worked in the US for a very long time, and during one of Trump's presidential ban on immigration, was stopped at JFK and was asked a technical question about software engineering to prove that he was actually a software engineer, which is a little bit of a shame. So, with our QR code and with our technology, effectively, the only thing you have to do is show the QR code and prove that actually you are employed where you claim you are employed, and you should really be able not to be exposed to humiliating questions about your professional qualifications. Right, we are coming to the end. So first of all, I hope I have convinced you that we are an innovative technology, we are user-friendly, and we would like to enable a lot of universities to gain more popularity, especially if you are not part of the advanced economy, and we would like to enable candidate and working candidate to come into the work economy. This is part of our mission. If you'd like to help us to do blockchain for good and you are a university, please come and talk to us during the break, and we are willing to make a pilot with you. And if you are a charity, please come and talk to us, and we are willing to talk to you in the future. If you want to talk to us, those are our handles, and as I said, I'm Maria Vigliotti, and I'm happy to take any question.
One question from Sue.
Are you connected into NARIC as well, in terms of being able to look at equivalence of qualifications? Is that something you've done or are looking at?
Equivalence qualification?
Well, NARIC internationally will look at a qualification granted in X university somewhere and then say this is equivalent to a qualification somewhere else. Because obviously degrees are given at different levels. A master in one place might be worth, more or less, if you like, than a master in another. And NARIC does that job of saying that your qualifications are equivalent to this level.
I think I was trying to say that we generally, at the moment, we are very focusing on a pilot, and I expect the HR to know what qualifications are equivalent. But it's something we can look certainly in the future to give employers assurance that the qualification they see on the CV is the correct one. So thank you for the suggestion.
I'm sorry we're still running to catch up. Can you save that for the break?
I'm happy to talk later.
Thanks, Maria.
Thank you.
And Laura from Zerado and Disberse. Laura from Zerado.
Okay. Aware that I am holding everyone up between their tea and coffee, so hopefully this will be at least interesting if not engaging. My name is Laura Bailey. I'm co-founder and chief commercial officer here at Disberse. Before we start, can I just ask you to raise your hand, please, if you've donated money to charity or a humanitarian aid cause before? Great. Keep it up, please. Sorry. Keep your hand up if you know exactly where that money went and the impact that it had. Fantastic. Okay. Obviously, not as many hands today. Global development today. So, $1 trillion flows through this sector every year from institutions, businesses, individuals, and charities. The UN estimates that up to 30% of that every year is lost to fraud and corruption. And that's not mentioning the administration costs and potential inefficiencies that now lie in those processes. Also, what's quoted is that 2.5 trillion addition is potentially needed to achieve the sustainability goals. Okay, so what is the problem? We've talked a lot about problem and blockchain and how we're going to solve things and do things for good. So a little bit about the sector inefficiencies. The distribution and tracking of funds is not easy. There's legacy banking systems, and often it can take weeks, if not a month or two, for funds to arrive. And it's not unheard of for 5 or 10% of that to be lost on the way. If we look at our financial flows and banking and systems today, it's quite right that they're not transparent. When we're being paid by our employers and sending money, of course they shouldn't know what we're spending that money on. Obviously, this sector is slightly different, and that's what has already been touched on today. And obviously, what this leads to is a reduced impact for those that need the funds most. Okay, so our solution. Disberse is a fund management platform that drives a transparent, efficient, and effective flow of foreign aid. This enables donors, governments, NGOs, and ultimately individuals to transfer and trace. And how do we do this? Obviously using blockchain, which we've alluded to a fair amount today. What are the user benefits? Cheaper and faster transfers, locally and internationally. That's because with our business model, we can and we are aiming to access the best exchange rates we can. With Disberse, we can also have an auditability trail for reporting and governance purposes, which naturally leads to increased trust. With blockchain, there is increased security as well. I won't go into that today, but also very happy to answer questions or speak to anyone about the technological details later. Okay, so how does it work? It all sounds fantastic. But in reality, what does this look like? So, first of all, project is defined, as they always should be. Nothing different there. Then, the funds are guaranteed. This means that they are either put in the Disberse escrow account, or they can be guaranteed by the donor. Now, what this looks like is, for example, £1 million or $1 million US would simply be 1 million would be 1 million digital funds or pounds. These are then issued to the donor account. So exactly the peg of 1-to-1 of UK pounds or dollars are then converted. These are then traced and flowed down the train from donor all the way to beneficiary via whatever intermediaries are required to the very end of the train. And then they're redeemed. So this is the final step, and sometimes alluded to as the most difficult step in this whole process. There's several ways to do this, and we're looking at all of them. So we can transfer it into local currency, it can go to mobile money, or it can be a voucher system. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach now, which is often where we like to see our differences and what we're quite passionate about. Up here you can see 3 of our pilots that we're working on at the moment. So a girls' education programme in Swaziland, and I'll allude to that more in a moment. We're looking at a deforestation project in Uganda and a solar distribution project in the Philippines. But actually, our approach has got 5 streams to it. Yes, technology is one, but then there's legal, there's regulatory, there's policy and government, and then there's the sector. Each of those need to be understood and brought along on this journey to make sure that we can actually make a change. And I will elaborate on that a little bit later. Okay, so our pilot. This is actually live at the moment, and I can't share results today, but they will be available hopefully by next week when everything is absolutely finalised, but it is live at the moment. So we've been working with a UK charity called Positive Women. Positive Women work with vulnerable women and children on the ground in Swaziland that are infected or affected by HIV and AIDS. So what we've done is we're working with them to transfer funds from the UK all the way through to Swaziland, and what we're doing here is 2 things with this particular pilot. We're sending money to 5 different schools, so that is paying for individual education, and it is also paying for personal development for those women. As I say, there will be more information on that in the coming week or 2. Okay, just to promise I'm coming to the end now, they'll be copying too soon. A little bit on exposure and what we've been doing this year, which is quite exciting, which alludes back to our approach. So at the beginning of the year, we finalised a partnership with Clifford Chance, so Magic Circle law firm, who are helping us develop our legal and regulatory framework, obviously here in the UK, but also internationally. In February, we were on the front of the FinTech Times, obviously talking about blockchain and humanitarian aid, and blockchain for good. In April, we were one of 10 companies chosen out of about 400 to present at the UK government FinTech conference. Also in that month, we're delighted to say that we'll be working even closer with the UK regulator, the FCA, on how this works from a regulatory perspective and finance. Ben, our CEO, who's in the audience at the back there, was on BBC Radio 4 earlier this month on the Today programme. We found out about it by his mother calling him on the train at 5 a.m. And then finally, really excited to say that we finalised a partnership with the STAR network. Now, they are actually part of Save the Children, so Karl, who spoke earlier. They have got over $100 million in funds and have got 42 members who are INGOs. So what we're looking to do there over the next coming months is finalise a pilot, a full chain pilot from DFID all the way through the chain to beneficiaries via cash transfer. So it's going to be a busy couple of months for us. Oh, I did have another slide, but that's fine. Oh, here we are. Apologies. Just quickly, our team. So this leads back to our approach. Within our team, we've got obviously technology experts that have been working in blockchain since 2010. We're vendor agnostic at the moment. We are building on credits blockchain. We have looked into all of them and have done a substantial amount of work with Ethereum and Bitcoin, etc. Ben, as I alluded to, is our CEO and co-founder. He's worked in the sector for his whole career, managed hundreds of millions of funds, mainly worked in sub-Saharan Africa. And then we've got Paul, who's a humanitarian aid lead, and obviously the others aren't here today, so I don't need to talk about them. Okay, but call to action is essentially, to achieve something like this, we need everybody to get on board and understand and do their bit. So if you've got any questions or would like to get involved, please do come and talk to Ben or myself that are here today.
Right, Laura was very naughty because there is still one more use case for us to hear before we go for tea or coffee. But thank you, Laura. And Marcus is coming up from the University of Middlesex to talk about the use of blockchain in creative and cultural industries.
Sorry.
Right, we'll go slideless to hasten coffee and avoid technical issues. Briefly, my name is Mark Adair. I'm an academic. I'm senior lecturer at Middlesex University. I'll be investigating what we do with our qualifications in the break and Bitcoin applications. I'm actually a senior lecturer in popular music. What am I doing here? I'm here because I'm also the convener of the Blockchain for Creative Industries research cluster at the university. So we did a report, for instance, last summer called Music on the Blockchain. Still doing research around unlocking value in creative industries more broadly using distributed ledger technology. I'm not going to, in a very unacademic way, I'm not going to get into today what we mean by good, what we mean by blockchain, where it crosses into distributed ledger technology, and so on. So, little story to introduce where the creative industries use case might exist. It's a story just that's very familiar. It was something that came up after the death of David Bowie last year. And so there's an artist called Helen Green who made a lovely gif of Bowie through the ages changing. It's beautiful, all these different incarnations of, Ziggy Stardust and the Thin White Duke, etc. And Media Chain, blockchain company, who incidentally, which was bought by Spotify, that's an example of the moves in this space at the moment. Media Chain published, as an example of what happens to digital content, the story of this, where in one day, this beautiful GIF that was posted in the morning, slowly through the day, through no malign intent, gets modified, the watermark gets cropped off, other people are putting filters on, and attribution is lost. And this is not an unusual story, this is the same thing happens all the time. So there's a massive disconnect. Quote I have on the slide I'll read out to you, it's from the book on intellectual property recently. Intellectual property has been stretched to breaking point by digital technologies and activities. There's a gulf between copyright law and everyday practices, which we all know about. So, transformation of blockchain technology. Number one, the idea of an unbreakable link between artists and work. In the metadata for instance, a piece of music or an image, any kind of digital content, we can have information which spectacularly, startlingly, we don't currently have about, for instance, who the rights holders are for that piece of content, how you get hold of them, terms of licensing, etc. So it becomes radically easier to identify the rights holders. At the moment, there is, as my lawyer friend says, something he hates to see, money being left on the table. And there are things called orphan works, which are works where people don't know who owns the copyright, or they can't get hold of these people who own the copyright. These works are being underused. There are derivative works where a piece of music samples other works, or a painting is based on a photograph, or whatever, derivative works of some kind, which people are nervous about because, again, of copyright issues and not being sure who to contact, how to get hold of them, etc. I was on a panel recently where someone was talking about trying to license music for computer games, and it got so difficult to license this track and to work out who owned it that they ended up not using the track, and money being left on the table. There are already IP registries. The problem is that plural, the registries bit. So what we have is silos of data. For instance, in the music world, where I am, there is not one single database of all song and recording copyrights. There are several, none of them are complete, and occasionally they even disagree. Now, obviously, fundamental to blockchain technologies and distributed ledgers is the notion of a networked database. So information can be available in a network fashion rather than stored in discrete databases, and incrementally we could move towards something that's been tried before and failed, a single comprehensive music copyright database, and the same will go for other creative industries. Another challenge is that, again, for instance in music, but we could think of lots of other use cases across the creative industries, the lumps of rent are small, numerous, and you can collect them only through some sort of collective management organisation. In music, this has got worse of late in the streaming era, so to characterise this as a move from ownership to access, and what that means is the equivalent of a novelist having to keep track not only of every time the novel was sold, but every time the novel was read. You've got lots of tiny transactions, and it's very inefficient. There are intermediaries taking cuts, and the payments was remarkably slow. So the speaker earlier was talking about payments not taking months. In music, sometimes the payments take years to get back to the people who made the music, although obviously the consumer is listening to that music at the click of a button. So micropayments facilitated on distributed ledgers can dramatically reduce friction, dramatically increase speed of payments, enable like a tip jar model some people are also exploring, so that creators can be paid direct by consumers. And consumers can also pay only for the amount of content that they consume. Challenge 3, opaque supply chains. Fashion is an example. We heard a little bit about that earlier, but for instance, if somebody is marketing a particular product as being ethically sourced, we actually don't know. There are examples of companies claiming that their products are ethical and then their labels getting found in the rubble of a sweatshop or something. So this is a way of tracking the provenance of what ends up being your supposedly ethical trainers or whatever. Same sort of deal in music. There is royalty payments that get lost in so-called black boxes. There are deals hidden behind non-disclosure agreements and so on. So the promise of blockchain technology is transparency through supply chains. In fashion, company Provenance, for instance, are looking at digital passports which have the information about people and places and processes and materials behind a given product. In music, the use case would be that managers or artists are able to properly audit whether they're getting the money that they should be. And I'll only give one more challenge, although there are a few others, but this is the idea that in the sort of digital economy, supposedly this is an era of DIY, do-it-yourself, empowered artists and so on. You don't need record labels, you don't need publishers, you don't need all those big players. And in reality, you can do that, so barriers to access have dropped, recording technology has got cheaper, it's got easier to distribute your music digitally, other technologies have got cheaper, it's got cheaper to make films, etc., etc. But for money, for capital, it's very difficult to get that apart from going to the old people who always had the money, like for instance record labels. The alternative has been crowdfunding, but crowdfunding as it currently stands is quite limited in that there's very few instances of repeat crowdfunding success. So occasionally someone will make a load of money through a crowdfunding campaign, and even some quite high profile artists will fail. But even if they have a spectacular success once, there's a sort of quasi-philanthropic element to giving to an artist, and where in a charity use case people might be happy with that philanthropic relationship, it's more complex with an artist who you already know has got a load of money. And so there's a challenge in a repeat reward model crowdfunding that hasn't been solved. And so crowdfunding, as it currently stands, seems to be only a partial solution. What blockchain technology could facilitate is what some people call crypto equity crowdfunding. The notion that not only can you have greater certitude using the blockchain that funds reach creators and that funders use the funds, that creators use the funds as they're supposed to do, so smart contracts can guarantee this. You can have much smaller scale crowdfunding projects so that people fund, for instance, a chapter rather than a book, a song rather than an album, etc. But also you can allow funders to receive a fair share of the projects that they fund. If you fund a record that then ends up on a Hollywood soundtrack and the creator gets a load of money, at the moment you wouldn't get any share. These are smart contracts, you could get a fair share of the value you help create. And in our Musical and the Blockchain report, which is available online, we look at other potential applications for things like investors and accelerators in creative industries. Obviously, there's all kinds of barriers to adoption, which are the same as other people have outlined. So I agree, broadly speaking, with the idea that whatever happens has to be under the hood. All kinds of risks that we should not ignore. But I was just going to end with a quote from the idea that blockchain technology is a meta technology. And a meta technology is innovation in technological systems that has impact across multiple sectors. So it's great to be here today talking about this innovation across the multiple sectors. Normally under one person in the room not talking about FinTech, and it's very nice to have other people in the same room not talking about FinTech. Thanks very much. And I imagine we don't want to take questions now, but I'll be around over coffee if people want to call out me.
Well, thank you to all our use cases and to Robert. Despite everyone's best efforts, we still haven't quite caught up with ourselves, so we're still behind schedule. We're going to have a break now for coffee. Could I ask everyone to be back in here at 5 to 4? Does that give people enough time to have a coffee?
Never happens.
Say 4. 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock.
Say 4.
Okay, welcome back. Timekeeping as ever, very British. Really exciting first half. Hopefully, equally exciting second half. We've all got refreshed, so we can get into this panel discussion. We have a expert panel with us today, for which we're very grateful to them all. What we're going to do is talk about how the issues that we face and the technology might merge. We've got a panel with expertise both on what are the sort of challenges that need to be addressed and also how some of the technology might solve that. So we'll hear from each panel member, get their thoughts, but then as they're thinking, please do think of your questions. We've got time. We'll probably run up to the hour. So do have your questions ready. There's an expert panel for you to engage with afterwards. So, quite enough from me. Let's starting with Sue, perhaps.
Oh, okay, fine. I was last on the list, but happy to start. Because I'm not going to, I'm starting you off on something very different. I'm here because I'm a director of migration work, which is a community interest company, a social enterprise, that works with communities to make migration work to their benefit, both the migrants and the people who they're joining. We've got a particular specialism in working with cities and working on service delivery and so on within cities. And I've got a particular specialism in working on and with undocumented migrants. So I think I'm mainly here because when Richard and I were talking about putting together various ideas and so on, I'm somebody who meets a lot of undocumented migrants and has access to them. And he was interested in thinking about that as a challenge to people who are producing technology. In particular blockchain, as to whether there were uses there for undocumented migrants. Now, talking about undocumented migrants, I think one of the problems is that we're actually talking about a whole bunch of different people subsumed under one title. At one level, undocumented migrant is simply a polite way of talking about what a lot of other people call illegal migrants. In other words, people who've broken the rules in some way and are here without, or in the relevant country, without leave. Very often that's quite a temporary situation. Somebody may well arrive, join members of their community here or whatever, and then apply, for example, for asylum fairly soon afterwards, and that'll be a process of regularising their situation. There are also, of course, people who are literally undocumented, people who don't have their documents. And increasingly, because we have what the previous Home Secretary, current Prime Minister, was very pleased to call a hostile environment for people who are in trouble with the immigration authorities in the UK. Increasingly, you need to produce documents for all sorts of different situations and all sorts of different services. And that's becoming very difficult. And it's becoming difficult for the third sector organisations, the charities, the faith communities, that sort of thing, who work with people who are trying to get services on their behalf.
And of course, some of those people who don't have documents may well not be migrants. And another interest of mine is homelessness in general. And there's a very close correlation between people becoming homeless and people not having or losing their documents. In other words, if you don't have documents, you may become homeless because you can't prove your rights to access benefits or housing or whatever. And equally, if you become homeless, if you started with documents, you may well lose them pretty quickly because it's a very risky, difficult situation. People steal your stuff, you lose it, etc., etc. So undocumented migrants, we don't have any idea how many of them there are in the UK, and of course there are lots of undocumented migrants across Europe in a variety of different situations. People who may have arrived in order to seek refuge, people who may have arrived in order to work and find they can't get round the complicated conditions that govern that in many countries, or people who arrived in other situations and then fell through the cracks later on. For most of those undocumented migrants, at some point when they need it, they will then try and access services, often not services provided officially by statutory authorities, but by voluntary organisations and so on. And at that point, there's very often an issue of trust. By then, people may well have learned to survive in all sorts of different ways. And one of the ways you survive is by telling different stories to different people. So that the people you work with may not know that you're undocumented. The people you share a house with may not know that you're undocumented. The person you hope to marry may not know that you're undocumented, because you know that that's something that you are worried about and that may make your situation difficult and so on. So undocumented migrants have a range of needs, and one of them is that they need to access services. Those services find it difficult to deal with people who have fluid identities. Somebody who may be working under one name, renting under another name, and actually have a different name altogether, that they were given at birth or whatever. Those organisations very often, we've heard all about impact and things like that for charities. If you're a charity, you're trying to find out about impact, and undocumented migrants present you with a major problem in that, in that you can't always track what goes on with them. You don't know if the referral you made stuck because they may well turn up to a different agency with a different name, with a different presenting story, with a different date of birth and so on. And you can't track their progress, and you can't see how well they're doing, or whether the advice and assistance you gave them actually worked, or whether it works better with some people than with others and so on. The other issue, of course, for undocumented migrants is that they often want to regularise, and a condition of regularising, often in a contradictory way, actually means that you have to prove that you existed in the country for a length of time. In the UK, the general rule is that if you've lived for 20 years in the UK, legally or illegally, then as long as you haven't committed major offences or done various other things, then you can then apply to regularise your situation. How do you prove that you've done it? Especially in situations where you may well have used a range of different documents and things like that. So there's a need to prove your presence, and in some other countries there'll be a need to prove other things as well, maybe your family connections, maybe the fact that you've worked, even though that work may not have been legal. And in some countries work is a bit more fluid than in Britain, so work may be legal or illegal or neither one thing nor t'other. But if you've got a work contract and you can show that you've worked for X number of years, you may be able to regularise. And of course, there's a kind of third need, really, which is fourth maybe, which is about actually needing access to some documentation. If you do become homeless, then the pieces of paper that you take with you are likely to go missing fairly soon. If you sleep on the streets around here, you'll get hosed out. You will lose. Literally, somebody will come along with a fire hose and pour water on you until you go away. That's the policy of Westminster and the City of London at the moment. So, of course, you'll lose your documents as you gather yourself up and run away from the fire hoses and things like that. So it would be very helpful if you had some remote access to some forms of documentation and things like that, or something that proves and validates the fact that you are a real human being with a real identity, and you're not just somebody trying to claim benefit 4 times with different identities or something like that. And all of that is about trust, really. And there's a sort of need, in a sense, for people to be able to prove who they are, show their passage through different services, but not give away too much information, because it may well not be anybody else's damn business, who it is you have a relationship with, but that might become terribly important later on when you want to regularise your status. It's not necessarily the business of the agency you go to help for with accommodation, where it is you work, as long as they know how much money you're getting in and you can pay the rent. And that employer may not want people to know it because they may be employing you illegally and so on. And there's a sort of fourth element, which is that in many cities which I work with, there's an interest in developing citizenship that is independent of people's legal status in the country. Those are cities that recognise, and many of them do, many of the larger European cities have signed up to all sorts of declarations, the people who live here belong here. And we want them to do the best they can within our city because we think that benefits everybody. And we would like them to be able to access services. There's been moves to document the undocumented, in the States, for example, quite a lot of moves. And those are now coming into question because there's a threat from the administration, which also wants to create a hostile environment, that actually it will require access to all those registers of undocumented migrants that cities have kept in order to enable their access to services, but those will then be used by the immigration enforcement teams to line up people for deportation and removal. So cities in other places are interested in developing that, but want to know how that information can be kept secure, how the use of it can in some way be controlled by the person who's given the information, but at the same time it can be useful to all of those agencies. So that's the challenge, and I think that supplementary question is quite interesting, I think, to think about using this extreme case of undocumented migrants who have a very extreme need for trust and security and so on. It's worth thinking about other people who may well benefit from those types of services in terms of identity. Homeless people are obviously one of them, but there may well be quite a lot of other groups if we think about them.
Hi there, I'm Rodri Davis. I run Giving Thought, which is a think tank, an in-house think tank at Charities Aid Foundation, which is actually conveniently for me based downstairs from here, so this is the shortest journey to events I've ever had to make. Why I'm here, I mean, my role is much broader than kind of technology or even blockchain. I run a think tank, as I say, kind of within Charities Aid Foundation, and the focus is on philanthropy and the work of charities and kind of ensuring that people are able to give as effectively as possible to the causes they care about. But back in 2013, I slightly accidentally got interested in cryptocurrency and kind of naive way thought, ooh, Bitcoin, that's a new source of money, therefore some people could give it to charity. That's where I started from, and then over time I kind of went through the journey that I think a lot of people went on of thinking, hang on a minute, perhaps what's more interesting than that is the sort of underlying technology that allows you to keep a record of transactions. And at that time people were starting to talk a lot about the way that blockchain could be applied in lots of other different kinds of contexts to record different sorts of assets. So I subsequently have produced 4, I think, sort of discussion papers looking at various aspects of the ways in which blockchain technology could be applied to the world of charities, and particularly kind of charitable giving. And I'm just going to kind of flag up a few of the key points that have come out of that have led to particularly interesting conversations and that have led to a continual sense of surprise that every time I say something that certainly within CAF people think is absolutely insane and in the realms of science fiction, within 6 months I've had somebody get in touch and say they're actually doing it right now. So the first thing that I think is very interesting, is kind of where I started from, and we've heard some examples of this today, is the way in which technology can be used to reduce or even remove some of the costs that charities currently face around transactions. So obviously the kind of disintermediation in things like financial services or legal services in the future might well mean that a lot of the costs charities face, particularly when operating across geographic borders, might be radically reduced, so FX costs, banking costs, those sorts of things. And also, as well as the reduction in costs, it could make it possible to get money into areas of the world where currently is extremely difficult, either because traditional banking infrastructure is lacking or because governance is an issue or corruption is an issue. Obviously, that massively begs the question about how you get the cryptocurrency back out into something that people can use in the real world, which I think is the backdrop to quite a lot of this conversation at the moment, because unless there is universal take-up of cryptocurrency, a lot of these blockchain use cases are fascinating and very interesting in pilot phase, but they're kind of not very applicable in the real world, and I think that is a challenge. The second way in which I think this is very interesting from the point of view of philanthropy, and certainly you can see this in the work that Raph's been doing with Alice and Ben and the guys with Disberse, is around massively increased transparency, almost potentially 100% transparency, certainly within the closed system that's on the blockchain. That has the potential to boost trust amongst donors, as we've heard, but I think also it's important for charities to cotton on to the fact that the technology makes this possible, not only so they have the opportunity to take advantage of it now, but also so they don't find themselves overtaken by it, and in a situation where somebody has flicked on a light switch and there is 100% transparency, and they have failed to have the necessary conversations with their donors about the need to spend a certain proportion of money on central costs, the fact that in some circumstances you might want 100% opacity. For instance, if you are an aid organisation trying to get money to a charity working in Uganda around gay rights, you probably don't want somebody to be able to just look at that and see potentially even who the individual organisations or even individual beneficiaries are. So I think there are significant challenges that need to be thought through now. Moving slightly more into the realms of things that I thought were speculative, but it turns out not so much. One thing I think is very interesting is the convergence of blockchain with other technologies, particularly artificial intelligence. So blockchain, one of the things, if it does take off and there's large-scale adoption, it will result in hugely increased data sets around lots of things. Certainly social needs, if you assume that government agencies are going to start using it, it will hopefully open up silos around data on social and environmental needs. And assuming that organisations, charities and others start to record their social value in the way that somebody like Olinga was saying might be possible, you suddenly have these huge data sets available, not only on where the most pressing needs are, but where the most successful interventions are. And using artificial intelligence to come up with a rational matching of those things could mean in the future there's a kind of version of philanthropy in which the human donor can be entirely removed. Now, I've sort of said this to people before, and they've said, but doesn't that take the heart out of it? Why? Nobody is ever going to be down with the idea of philanthropy where they don't have the element of donor choice. But where I think it's very interesting is the third bit of the convergence with the kind of massive growth in the Internet of Things. There's going to be an exponential increase in the number of machine-to-machine transactions going on, which will be generating lots of little bits of revenue all over the place. There's the opportunity, I think, to direct even a tiny fraction of those towards charity along the lines of something like a kind of rounding to the pound initiative at the moment. When you go into a restaurant and they say, do you want to round up your bill to the nearest pound and give that to charity? Imagine that could happen for every single donation, for every single transaction that was going on in a massively connected Internet of Things. Potentially a massive pot of money, absolutely impractical for a human agent to have oversight of every single one of those things. So the choice would be either a very old-fashioned model of, here's a list of 5 charities I want the money to go to, or you have to think through the possibility of applying technology in the form of artificial intelligence to have some kind of matching procedure. So I think it is a thing that could feasibly happen, and I have had conversations with people about that, although it's pretty early days. The other two things that are linked that are slightly separate are the impact that blockchain technology could have, not on the operation of charities as they exist now, but the very sort of structure and nature of organisations and the ways in which people do good. One of these is the idea that you could take existing charitable organisations and register them as entities on the blockchain, and there are people doing this in the corporate space, people like Autonomous and people and other organisations. And the impact that would have, particularly around regulation, is, I think, fascinating and potentially concerning. So you might switch from a model where regulation was set down in laws which were then subsequently enforced by a government agency, so you would be penalised after the fact, to a model where the laws were enshrined up front algorithmically and it was impossible to break them in the first place. Now, there's great efficiencies in that. There's also some slightly kind of terrifying draconian implications around restrictions of freedom, particularly from the point of view of charities, where it comes to things like campaigning, when you might well want to break the existing laws in order to demonstrate the flaws in them or the fact that the system is not perfect as it stands, and you might find it impossible to do that in that scenario. And then the final thing comes back to something that was said earlier. I think a question was raised about whether disintermediation posed an existential threat for the charity world, and I think the sense was it might have an impact in certain areas, but it probably won't be all pervasive because there will always be benefits from scale. I think that's true, but I think there's something very interesting about the kind of distributed autonomous organisation or DAO model, and particularly the kind of application of AI to that, which is this idea of AI DAOs, where I think actually the benefits of decentralization in terms of things like logistics and economies of scale, and also the benefits in terms of decision making that currently require you to have some sort of centralization, might potentially evaporate. And so you can have these huge distributed networks of individuals able to act in a concerted way to address social issues and directly interact with organizations or even individuals on the ground, and have a kind of procedure for consensus building and also responding to need. And all of a sudden, the traditional model of an intermediary charity that we've had for the last 100 years, because that was the best solution that we currently had, suddenly looks no longer relevant. And the question then is, what is the role of the charity in that world? Do they just take on an advisory or a curation role, or do they cease to have any function whatsoever? And I haven't currently got an answer to that question, but that's what I've got to. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alan Sheriff. I'm a director of a small FinTech company called Cbox. So I've got nothing to do with charities at all, but I have been involved in the blockchain sector for about 2 years now. I'm here because I had a connection with Glenn and Richard. We looked at the idea of identity-less people and finding a solution to that, which also gives me a connection to what Sue was talking about earlier, so looking at the work with migrants, homeless people and so on. So I worked on the technology section of that, the potential solution and use of blockchain, and in particular self-sovereign identity as implemented on the blockchain is an area that I'm quite interested in. I think you are as well, aren't you, Dave?
Well, let's wait and see.
I'm a bit terrified of treading on Dave's toes because I know what he's like. Nowadays, so I've worked in FinTech. I generally work behind the scenes in the automation of processes, the integration of systems for financial planners, wealth managers, investment platforms. I've worked with Origo standards, which are the standards for transacting in the UK automatically using XML messaging. I've worked with the Swift banking network as well. So my perspective now, I'm sort of turned a bit old and grey, a little bit more stupid, but a little bit more organised, is I'm now project manager. So my perspective on this is always as how will I deliver a solution? So when I look at blockchain, I'm thinking about, should I be using blockchain at all? What are the options? And if I am going to use blockchain, what are the challenges? And how am I going to deliver that to give a good solution, an economical solution? Over the years, I've worked a lot behind the scenes of the financial stack in the UK. This is a stack of technology that I think has been mentioned a few times, which has grown to be massively complex, hugely expensive. I think the Keynote went into that in some detail. That's not by design. The financial stack has evolved over decades. And where I've got involved is when I've worked with standards organisations like Origo, who typically work with a group of competitors, a group of investment platforms or wealth managers or so on, who have suddenly realised that they've all got a common process. They all do roughly the same thing, but it's all a bit woolly at the moment how they do things, so they need to collaborate. So they get together, they get a third party in who talks about how we can standardise that. They come up with some standards to automate processes between themselves. And then they work out how they can do that automatically through messaging. And then there's a load of sitting around and wrangling about, right, how exactly are we going to implement this now? We can either send messages to each other directly, which when there's a small group, that works very well, and that's fine. But as that group starts to grow and expand, then they suddenly realise that they do need to implement a central third party. So a system that sits in the middle of all of these collaborating, untrusted competitors, and that's how that third party gets set up in the middle there. And until I read about blockchain in 2015, I thought, yes, that's correct. That's the way that things should work. My platforms can make a single connection to one central hub, which sorts everything out. They can then connect to all of the other people on that hub, And it also sorts out the legal framework as well. And this seemed like the natural way to do. But that's how that financial stack has evolved, is because of the constant introduction of this set of intermediaries that run all the way from the top of the stack, from the investor through the financial planners to the investment platforms to the product providers, the fund managers, the third-party intermediaries, the custodians, the settlement banks, the Bank of England, all the way down. There's reams and reams of intermediaries that have evolved over the years through that kind of process coming into play. So it was in 2015 where, by accident I suppose, I started to research new technology, came across the phrase blockchain, looked into the concepts of decentralization, and that basically shattered my view of how the financial stack should work. I suddenly realised that we don't need, it doesn't need to work this way at all. And it's a bit far-fetched maybe, but I could see how the financial stack could be de-layered. So these intermediaries can be replaced by this technology of trust, which allows all of these untrusted parties to transact with each other securely. And so we can see how enormous amounts of cost can be taken out of that financial stack. And by that means, and I'm getting around to the blockchain for good bit here now, as we start to take cost out of that financial stack, then it opens up the possibility of the cost of investment dropping, potentially, technically speaking anyway. The cost will drop, the cost of investment will fall, and then it opens up the affordability of investment, which in turn should increase financial inclusion. So for people that were unable to afford investment previously, it opens the market up so they can get affordable investment for their savings, their pensions, whatever. They should also have access to affordable advice, which isn't really much to do with blockchain. That's more kind of AI and robo and things like that. So that's why I'm here, I think. I have also recently been working with a collective of blockchain enthusiasts. Gary Nuttall in the corner, there's another one staring at me there. We've been looking at things like contract law on blockchain, so I guess you'd call it smart contract law as a possibility. We've been looking at the application of it in the realms of regulation technology or RegTech. We've looked at applying governance to decentralized networks as well. So how are you going to automate? I think Roger was talking about how could you automate the laws that are going to govern that network. My belief in the blockchain for good world, governance is vital, because if someone has their identity and some savings on a blockchain network, if it were Bitcoin or Ethereum public networks as it stands and they lose their private key, then that's it, it's game over, they've lost it. There's no recourse for them. So I think governance is absolutely essential in this particular arena. Not for everybody, of course. And yeah, that'll do. I'm a bit of a fanboy of Ethereum as well. I'll hand over to Dave, thank you.
Well, we all thanks. So I'm Dave Birch, I'm Director of Innovation at Consult Hyperion, which is a specialist electronic transactions consultancy. I'm a visiting professor at the University of Surrey Business School, and I'm interested in the real-world applications of new technologies. So broadly speaking, I guess I have 2 or 3 areas of expertise which are useful for this. So just to pick up on something Sue said, one of our clients is IDNYC, so I know a little bit about getting ID to undocumented people at population scale. I may well be the only person in the room who has actually been detained by Her Majesty's Immigration and Border people. Has anybody else here, I mean, you talk it up the storm, who else has actually been detained by immigration? Thank you very much. So, excellent. So there's valuable expertise to put into that. So fortunately, because it was me, they put you in the cell and then they come back with your passport a bit later on and start asking you questions about, I see you were in France in February 2003. Was that business or like I couldn't even remember if it was January. If you were asking me about January, I wouldn't have any idea. And that's how I got out. Because, like, I think terrorists would like really try and memorise the. Hadn't got a clue. So I know a little bit about being detained as well. And thirdly, I know how blockchains work, which I think puts me in a fairly substantial minority amongst the things I go to about this. Which brings me to the nub of the issue. So the question is. Because a lot of these things I go to, and I'm not making fun about that thing we went to a couple of weeks ago, but you and I were both at this thing, and people were talking about the blockchain like they were talking about pixies. Like they were saying, well, how are we going to help these people? Well, it's okay, because pixies are going to take care of the whole... Like, that's what they were saying. Nobody had the faintest idea what a blockchain was or how it worked. But it was going to fix everything in some unspecified way that nobody had actually come across. And the type of the is architecture. So the question is, what is the architecture that's going to happen? And I'll just very quickly answer that in 3 ways. So first of all, I'll ask the same question I always ask when somebody says, can we use the blockchain for X, whatever X is, which is, well, what's in the blocks? If we're going to use the so what are you going to put in the block? So the blockchain is going to help undocumented migrants in Germany. That's fantastic. What are you going to put in the blocks? Right? And you may, okay, so we can put data in the blocks about people. That's a really bad idea. I actually went to I won't say names, it's not a problem. I went to a thing they were talking about, it was actually with people trafficking. And they would say there's the women that are escaping from being trafficked and whatever. And we're going to put their details in the blockchain. Like, what are you talking about? That's insane! You're going to build a database of vulnerable women that anybody can read. Why? What is the... Well, here comes the blockchain's magic. It's going to take care of it. So the question is, clearly, for the reason you outlined, you can't put personal data in there. That's stupid. So we can put hashes of documents in there, which in your use case makes sense, but for undocumented, it makes no sense. What are these documents you're going to... And then when I turn up at the border, it's okay because there's a hash of my birth certificate on the blockchain. So that's a big help. So this way to the cells, please. You can open the door yourself. But obviously I come from the more technological side of things. So if the question is there something we can put in blocks which might be helpful, the answer, broadly speaking, is proofs. So what's interesting to me is using the blockchain to form a record of proofs. And I can give you a very trivial example, which is that you can cryptographically construct a proof that I'm over 18 and therefore allowed to buy a beer without giving away who I am. It's to do with set construction. I mean, essentially, I have to provide a cryptographic proof that I'm in the set of people that are over 18 without disclosing which member of the set I am. And that seems to me to be a viable area of research in the RegTech context you were talking about. I think this is an area where research is appropriate and where I think all of the... So is it possible to think of things you can put in the blocks which would actually help? I think the answer to that is yes, but it's a lot more complicated than I think people make it out. So the idea of scan some document and put in it doesn't make any sense. And the third thing is, and by the way, when you what you're going to put in this, I have favourite examples of a lot of things. My favourite example of German undocumented migrants at the moment. Actually, I have two favourite things about German undocumented migrants at the moment. So one is the German government passed a rule which said that because they give undocumented migrants this kind of temporary ID card, and they passed a law to say anybody who's got one of these temporary ID cards should be able to open a bank account because financial inclusion is an essential if you're going to incorporate people in the society and get them to be useful. And of course the banks won't take it, even though the government said, because the banks say, well, it doesn't comply with FATF and whatever. In other words, because the district court in Waco, East Texas, could fine us $17 billion for taking this, you can call it what you like, we're not taking it. There's an international dimension, and the blockchain is not going to fix it. I don't want to break any hearts, but I have to be the one that's going to tell you the blockchain is not going to fix that, whatever we do with it. Second, my other favourite German thing at the moment is, I don't know if you follow these stories, but all of the army barracks in Germany were shut last week because they've been searched by the police. And the reason is because the police found a locker full of guns at a railway station. And so somebody was cleaning them or something. So what they did was they staked out the locker to see who came to pick up these guns, right? So this guy turns up to pick up the guns, they arrest him. He turns out to be a serving German soldier. He belongs to this Nazi cell in the German army, right? So they take him down to the police station, run his prints. His prints show up in the Syrian refugee database. because him and his mates have all taken the precaution to go down and register themselves as Syrian refugees, just to make sure if their fingerprints are ever found on any guns or bombs or anything, it goes refugee way. So the blockchain's not magic. The blockchain doesn't know that they're not refugees. Like, you take those fingerprints and put them on the blockchain, and now forever they're on. Like, how does the blockchain know that he's not a refugee but really is? It's mad. And once it's on the blockchain, it's there forever. You've got to be really, really careful if you're going to start putting things on blockchains. They're going to be there forever. Whatever your right to be forgotten says about it, or Theresa May's, you can delete your Facebook pictures or whatever it is. Like, it's on the blockchain, it's on the blockchain, full stop. So my 3 points are, actually I forgot what my 3 points are, but some good points are, like, if somebody says we can use the blockchain for good, or actually for evil, because to be honest, I'm on the fence. I don't know which way we want to use the blockchain yet. But if somebody says we're going to use the blockchain, ask them what is in the block, because unless you can ask that basic question, you don't know what you're talking about. What are you actually going to put in the blocks? Otherwise, you have the whole thing. Secondly, I don't want to make the private key point because it's inappropriate. No, I will make the private key point, which is just to agree with this completely. So when this comes down to proving ownership of things as opposed to having proofs about you, if it's proving ownership of something, whatever it is on the blockchain, that comes down to having the private key. Okay. Now, people print them out on pieces of paper and then the dog eats them and stuff like that. So now, my solution to that is well known. It's on Twitter. I printed out my private key. It's a QR code, and I had it tattooed onto my scrotum, and that works for me. But I'm not saying that's a universal solution. I don't know if everybody's comfortable with that. But it is the only PKI joke in existence, which is that other people have a private key, but I have a private key. Get it? Come on! How many PKI jokes have you ever heard, John? Come on! It's not fair. So there's this issue about the... And that has to be an institutional solution, because unless there are some institutions that are going to take care of that for people, they really are a bit stuffed. And I want to make another point about why you're even talking about a blockchain, because a blockchain is only one specific kind of shared ledger technology. You're only going to use it. The point of blockchains is they work when they're untrusted third parties who are part of the network. So if you have a network of aid agencies, or who exactly is the untrusted third party that's in? Because wouldn't our time be better spent tracking them down, rather than computing proofs of work in inappropriate places? Anyway, that's my point. So it could be useful, but it's more complicated than you think. And obviously, I say that because I'm a tech guy. Mike.
Good afternoon. My background, so as Mike Brookbanks, I'm also associated and linked in with code at Surrey University. But my background is that, similar to Dave's, actually, I've had 25 plus years working in technology companies within financial services. But the focus of what I'm interested in is very much looking at the socio-economic aspects of some of this digital technology. So, and blockchain as an example. And as we've heard today, it's going to have a disruptive impact on many communities. It's cross-industry. The third point I think we've heard a bit about today, but fundamentally the financial services and technology companies that are actually driving blockchain do not really have a history of responsible innovation. They don't come from a background of looking at how the technology could be used in the best way, in a socio-economic way. It's all really for profit and how they can do it for profit. So, going back to the next point, the socio-economic, cultural aspects, governance, risk models are all new. There is there's very limited academic work in this whole area of digital technologies, technology governance, and responsible innovation. We've heard about the next one. It combines many technologies. I think the final point is the key one. It's the combination of these features that actually can be powerful. The combination of the distributed nature, the security, the ability to prevent tampering in a network, and trust, as we've heard today, is quite key. When I come on to trust, this is a model that I've developed. If you have the consumer, the user, whether it's financial services or anyone who's using this type of digital technology, I think it's covered up. There's a supplier there. but fundamentally people are using online and digital services. And the issue is, with this technology change and blockchain as a technology, it's changing the whole model of trust, risk, whether that's operational or reputational, as we heard again through the keynote speaker. From my perspective, I think that governance and responsible innovation needs to be brought in to manage the development of some of these technologies. I created an architecture, a business architecture, because it was titled Business Architecture, but we'll move on from that. This is another architecture. There are many architectures out there. This is the Hyperledger version of a technical architecture. But I think the key point that I have, and the thing that I'm interested in again, is that it delivers a number of outcomes, key outcomes. It will provide a single version of the truth. It is resilient. There is reliability, and the consensus mechanism means that data can be trusted between all the users. There is transparency in reporting. So it gives the possibility of real-time reporting. Many financial services or cross-industry transactions, reporting takes days or hours. This technology gives the potential for real state, current state, visualization, aggregation and integration of data. And I've just put together a chart which some of the scenarios we've heard about today on how DLT and blockchain can be used for good. So financial inclusion. We spoke about financial inclusion and something we've heard about today. But there's something I was looking at yesterday, Bitland. So there's now a land registry on blockchain that allows people therefore to have bank accounts in sub-Saharan or the global south. Goods provenance is clearly a key area, looking at where food and wine and diamonds, or as somebody suggested, some exotic materials like uranium could be used. It's also a potential solution for integrated care with decentralized record. But again, it's improved regulation and reporting. So that, to me, this technology has many opportunities. What is key is you take a top-down approach. You don't look at the technology and say, this is all wonderful. I heard the story of a FinTech. Well, I know the example of a FinTech company who went through one of the accelerator programs. And this person got funding. All he had was a set of PowerPoint slides. He had no technology whatsoever, but he got funding last year for his product.
That's the kids of today, mate. You're so old-fashioned.
I know.
You've got to have a product, and you've got to work, and all that sort of stuff.
It's not that fun now.
So I'm fundamentally a technologist that's turned into a cynic, and really want to start looking at how this technology could be used for good.
Okay. So we've still got time. So that's our expert panel. I am sure you've got questions, and that can be clarity, that can be you just want to speak, or it can be something directed. Should we start with you?
Yeah. Okay. Him or me?
You.
So I'm going to say straight out, I've got a vested interest in this. So this is a very loaded question, but there's a few topics that we've kind of skirted around that I think are very, very important here. So the three things, talking about any distributed ledger technology: scalability, fees, and also, is it actually decentralized? So I think we've kind of touched on it here. Decentralization, well, the Bitcoin blockchain is controlled by 5 mining pools, and Ethereum less so, but still, it's not truly decentralized. There's actually a bunch of people controlling it, and they can change the ledger. So that's not truly immutable. So that's one thing we've got to think about. The next thing is scalability. and the Bitcoin blockchain at the minute purports to run at 7 transactions a second in the whole world, but in reality runs around 1.52 transactions a second. Ethereum says it's 20 transactions per second, running at about 4 transactions a second. And the last thing is fees. So I was looking at the figures for both Bitcoin and Ethereum. And Ethereum, about 2 weeks ago, all-time high of about $1.51 per transaction, now reached $10, the maximum. And Ethereum averages about 4, but it's up to about 50 cents per transaction. So put that all together, can we actually use it? And the reason I say it, because I was here ranting about it 2 weeks ago, because I work for the IOTA Foundation, which is a different kind of distributed ledger. But if we're talking about this, do we need to have that kind of conversation? If we're living in that world, is there actually any benefit to having these blockchains and using them on your platform?
Thanks very much for that. Fees. Yes, this is something I was looking at recently as well. And I've also clocked the IOTA platform as well, and it looks like a fascinating alternative to what's out there at the moment, so I'm really keen to learn more about it. Because I started to worry when I looked at Ethereum, which the price of Ether has risen, is it now 15 times over, is it, since about January, something like that? I think one ETH is now worth something like 150...
192.
192 today. Oh, right. Okay. Dollars, right, okay. And the Ethereum network itself is powered by gas. So when you want to, I know it sounds slightly amusing, but so when you publish, you create a smart contract and you want to run it on Ethereum, then you have to pay some gas fees. And then each time you want to execute a transaction on Ethereum, again, you have to pay gas fees. You purchase gas by buying Ether. The price of Ether has been going through the roof recently, so therefore, in theory, the cost of running your application, decentralized application on Ethereum could also be going through the roof. So I did a little bit of looking into this, and I found that in fact the gas prices themselves they are decoupled from the price of Ether. So that the price of gas can be separated from the price of Ether. Unusually, the end user themselves can actually say what they're prepared to pay for that gas, and the net result is that if you decide to pay a bit less, then your transaction will get settled a lot more slowly, if at all. If you want to pay a lot more, then the miners on Ethereum will process it immediately, and you've suddenly got a very fast application. So the point is it's controllable, but it's bloody complex. So if I'm a project manager trying to deliver a project on Ethereum at the moment, I know that I've got to take into account the crypto economics of that network. And that's a key part of the business case, is that the model that you create to make sure that your application on Ethereum is actually going to be profitable, and especially in the charitable sector, you need things to be predictable. That has to be designed in with absolute clarity from the outset. It's no good trying to hack together something on Ethereum, putting it out there, seeing if it works. If you want something that's going to work at scale and isn't going to suddenly become completely unviable in the future, then it needs to be very carefully designed from the outset. The other point there is that with Ethereum and similar things, smart contracts as well have to be really, really carefully designed, because the more complex and inefficient your smart contract is, the more expensive it will be to run, because you're paying for the processing. So understanding the crypto economics is one of the challenges of implementing on Ethereum. I don't know very much about IOTA at the moment, but I understand that you don't have fees, is that right?
It's feeless, yeah.
Yeah,
and
feeless.
Scales.
So it scales, it's feeless, so problem solved.
So your answer is use your company?
It's not a company, I'm not paid. I'm actually a medical doctor.
Okay.
But I joined it because I was looking at how to transmit medical data using a blockchain, but I kind of ignored blockchain for ages because it didn't work. Where's my QR?
I'm just naturally very suspicious.
No,
People show up here claiming to be doctors all the time. all the time in techUK.
I'll work over at UCLA around
I'm a bit suspicious.
He wants to run a pilot with us.
Okay, see now it's third party.
So we've got you on the Gradbase
Now
already.
we're back
Check you.
we're back in the days of PKI.
Listen, I'm not sure that's a useful. I understand the point you're making. I'm not sure I would factor it into. I mean, the debate about the costs and so on really only has really one use. So if you go to a conference, somebody stands up and says, "Oh my God, we have this amazing new technology. We can send value anywhere in the world instantly and for free." Then you know they're full of it, right? They haven't been paying attention to anything. So you can discount everything they say from that point onwards. So it's useful in that respect. But in planning, not so sure. And the reason is because I think it's highly unlikely that either Bitcoin in its current form or Ethereum actually in its current form, they're moving to proof of stake model in the future. None of them in their current form are. If you want a techUK analogy, I think of them as the Newcomb of steam engine. They're the first steam engine that anybody ever paid any money for was this huge thing, and it pumped water out of mines. And it was colossally inefficient. But it didn't matter, because it could do that one thing that you couldn't do any other way, which is to get the water out of the mine. You roll forward, and you've got a steam engine on the Flying Scotsman doing 100 miles an hour. Yes, it's a steam engine, but it's not the same steam engine as the Newcomer. It has a condenser and a steam governor and so on. It's techUK, let's talk about it. So the idea that any of these applications will actually be rolled out at scale in the mass market on any of the platforms we have now seems to me to be a little unlikely. It seems infeasible to me that Satoshi Nakamoto accidentally hit on the best possible blockchain architecture as his first. I think because they're all kids, right? They're all 12 because they don't realise that it comes from a heritage. It comes from Hashcash and DigiCash and eCash and it's part of an evolutionary tree, and that tree is going to carry on evolving. So I'm not sure we would make the costs. The first. I think the thing to do is get the best architecture and then work out from there. So I understand your point, but I don't feel those costs are a constraint on the planning, because by the time we deploy anything, we won't be using any of those things anyway.
Should we take another question?
Again, my name is John Bullard. There's a law called Gall's Law, Galls law. I advise everybody in this room to take a look at it. What it basically says is that a complex system that works is invariably found to
Gall's law, your
evolve.
trigger word.
What?
Oh my God, John, you're supposed to ask these things.
Well, let me just finish Gall's law, which is a very quick point. A complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that worked. And the inverse is also true. A complex system designed from scratch invariably never works and cannot be made to work. And I think that's a pretty powerful statement in and around all the blockchain stuff. And Dave and I first got talking almost 20 years ago when I was in Barclays, and Dave was still doing very much the same thing. I don't think he got anything on his nether regions at that time, but
I stored it all in Barclays, so that was much easier.
But basically, you've got to have a trust model. You've got to have a framework, a check clearing system, set of rules, a Visa MasterCard set of rules where the liability flows are clear. Who's on the hook for what and when? And the technology is the easy bit. It'll fit in various bits. And Dave and I have been involved in a sort of journey of PKI on this space around digital identity for the last 18 years. And, it works, it exists. But that rule set is stuck doing nothing in some product shelf in Austin, Texas. So it shows you just how difficult it is to really get it up and running. And the banks built it. It
This goes to Mike's governance point, right? This goes to Mike's governance point, which is that I think that I don't want to deride them as kind of teenage angry white male pseudo libertarians, but the point is, if you're a 20-year-old undergraduate in computer science at MIT, having your self-sovereign identity and sticking it to the man, sounds like a great idea. But when your grandma presses the wrong button in an email, and now all of a sudden her house belongs to somebody who means, and there's nothing you can do about it, not such a great idea. The reason we have intermediation in financial services is because of 1,000 years of long and painful lesson learning. So this idea that we want this trustless environment, that's not clear to me at all. I don't want to try. I want institutions that can be held accountable for these kind of things. But how they're governed, I think, is more complex. And I suspect Mike is right, which is there is room for disruption at that level. The kind of institutional, the way things are organised. Is it possible we can have a more decentralised alternative? I'm prepared to think that's a real possibility. So can we disrupt? Yes. Are we going to do away with institutions? I'm not sure I see that.
Certainly from a charity perspective, as I was saying, I agree. I think the role of those institutions may well change in that environment, but it seems, again, in the charity world, there's been a slow process of greater and greater intermediation away from a kind of medieval model of alms giving directly to people who lived next door to you in the parish, and that was for a reason. Urbanisation meant that the scale and nature of the problems made that totally unfeasible. The charitable organisation arose as a way of kind of making it feasible to do that. Over time, that's developed into kind of massive global aid agencies because they have the scale and distribution networks to make that work. There is an interesting trend back the other way in the sector I work in that models of things like direct giving, so give directly, people giving direct trash transfers, that would be probably cash transfers to the developing world in order, on the basis that actually the most effective way to empower people to solve those problems is just to give them money and with no strings attached. It seems to be gaining quite a lot of currency. Maybe you can't extrapolate from that to the whole sector is going to become decentralised, but I suppose the interesting question is, if the alternative of kind of a decentralised model is available, should that lead us to question what it is about centralisation that was valuable in the first place, rather than just having it as an assumption that the only way of doing these things is to have very complex centralised organisations? That I think the answer will be somewhere in the middle, a level of decentralisation, and then you hit upon the kind of sweet spot of we need that level of organisation.
Yeah, I think it's a parallel discussion which isn't going to impact what we're talking about today. But this idea that the new technologies of mobile phones and social networks reconstitute the sort of mutual cross obligations of the pre-industrial society, I think that's true. So we say, well, we have structures with us now, institutional structures, which are a reaction to the urban anonymity of the Industrial Revolution, and actually we're allowing a new kind of memory to evolve, which takes us back to the future in an interesting way. I agree with you about that, and it's quite possible those institutions will grow up around that. But when it comes to the complete decentralisation, I'm not comfortable with that, because if you have no accountability at all, the Bitcoin, it's like an electronic Somalia. It's just warlords. It's like I want to know who's got. I want those people to be accountable. There's some Bitcoin idea that anybody can pass the money around. That it's good for the little guy. It's a joke. That just means the rich and the powerful remain unaccountable, and that can't be the goal that we want from all of this. So I agree with you about the potential for radical change in institutional structures, but doing away with them, I can't see it.
Okay, I am aware we have wine outside. I'd firstly like to thank all our speakers, our panel. Our speakers earlier today, thank you all so much. Look, I think we've got a great network here. I know Richard in particular and Beth has worked very hard putting this event together, so thank you so much for them, for their efforts. Hopefully the conversations will carry on. We'd really like to keep this community going. I think there's something very exciting, very interesting. There's definitely business to be done. I can see so many people making connections here. So hopefully this will be useful. Do stay in touch. Myself and Richard are very easy to find online. Just Google Glenn Parry UWE, you'll find me. Richard, also easy to find. So stay in touch. We'll try and build this network. If you're keen, we'll run further events, find out from you where you'd like us to focus next. Keep building the relationships, because there's clearly something here, and as I guess our expert panel pointed out, this is probably the early steam engine. David's point, this ain't it. But we can maybe at this point influence what the future is. And finally, thanks so much for techUK for hosting us here. Wonderful location for us. So thanks to you, and we'll or continue our conversation over a glass of wine based on. Thank you.